All right, good morning. Um, this is what the deck that I'm going to bring today to the Standard Pauper tournament. Um, um, I've been playing a ton of RB in all the formats. Um, um, and I think this is a reasonable. You can play with the removal spells, but I think overall, I think you want to come down on this kind of setup. So uh, it really hemmed and hawed about these two because you don't want to pay too many two mana creatures. You have enough threats between this card, this card. This also makes a 2/2 some of the time, most of the time. This is just a sticky blocker more than a threat, but in the first couple turns, if the opponent gets a slow start with a lot of tap lands, you can get in for a couple damage. Um, and he's also nice because he can be sacked to the Reckoner's Bargain and the Voltaic Surge, and also like getting 1 point of damage, like chump blocking, preventing the damage, and then finishing off the creature with Lightning Strike or something if it's a really large creature is helpful. Um, uh, and then yeah, so I came down on playing three of these and only one of these. Um, I think one of these in the deck can be a threat against decks that can't really answer it well, but I think most of the decks can answer this card well. There's the Candle Trap, and for white decks, there's just burning it against other red decks. Black decks, of course, have no issue even if it grew out of hand. Well, for the red decks, generally they're able to remove it before it can grow. Like you can't really grow it big enough to get out of a 3 damage burn spell before you pass the turn, unless you're really sandbagging it. Which, if you're sandbagging it to try to get in, then you're also wasting a ton of time, and which this deck doesn't want to do. So I think just one, just for that threat against the, potentially if someone tries to bring like a mono green deck or a deck that's really really light on removal, this can punish that. But I think overall you want to be on this plan. And going along with that, I think the removal that you want to max out on first is Lightning Strikes. Because it's just so often where the game kind of stalls out and you have the opponent at like 8 life. And that means that you only have to draw 2 Lightning Strikes. So I think having 4 Lightning Strikes in the deck is powerful with having 1 or 2 of these in play. And then the other removal spells is just a mix. I was trying to play some Strangle main deck. I think instant speed for your 1-drops is where you want to be. That way, when you attack in your one mana removal, when you attack in with your menace creatures, this one and this one, the opponent can't just freely block with 2/1/1s. Having this power to really threaten them, I think, is important. And then I was playing a little bit more, and there's some bigger artifact decks, and so I think having one of the upgrades in your deck is also going to be valuable. And again, this mix is just kind of where I'm judging. The format's really wide open, so you could play with these numbers a lot. But overall, I think I think 2 Revenants is kind of where you want to be. You don't want to go too many more than these. These are not that good, but they're a good sack outlet for all of your sack spells. So I think having 2 to be able to draw them. The other issue is if you draw both of them, that's a lot of mana you're spending trying to recur them every turn. But if the opponent doesn't have an answer to a recurable creature, it's also a pretty good card. For the sideboard, I really think for the mono white value decks, so there's a lot of cards that are 2/1s that draw a card, or 1/1s that draw a card. And so the mono white deck can really, really go wide. And obviously against Menace, going wide is really, really bad for the person trying to go Menace. So you really need to play in the festivities against mono white. And what's nice is playing 4, I actually played mono white and I drew both of them. And so I could really time it. So even against his 2/2s, or even against the card that recurs with a +1/+1 counter, I can just double in the festivities and one-sided wrath their board and then get in with a lot of creatures. And whatever creatures remain obviously have bad blocks as well, because I have Menace, and then I also have, they've already taken 2 damage for those blockers. Then again, Flame Blast Bolt's another conceit to the Disturb cards. And I ended up playing 1 main deck because they can be kind of a real pain. So I think this deck, the mono white deck, are probably the 2 strongest decks in the format. And it really depends on how you draw your deck. But I think this deck has a really good game plan against the mono white deck. And against other random decks, it just has solid card advantage. I can't emphasize enough that all of these RB decks that I'm playing really can get through a lot of cards with this card drawing 2, this card eventually draws 2, and then this card also draws 2. So you have a lot of good card draw in the deck. And I think red provides the best removal in standard. This black card is just a catch-all that I'm playing, since I do have ability to sacrifice a lot of random artifacts and stuff, so it's a catch-all and it's cheap. And then if I don't have anything I want to sacrifice late in the game, it doesn't have to be sacrificed. But I think the instant speed, the potential that if you only need 2 damage, you don't need to necessarily sacrifice your equipment, your Bard Badger Fist. Sometimes you actually still want to do that, again, playing around into the festivities. So if you're playing another red deck, you may want to preemptively sack the equipment to get it off the creature. So one issue is if you only can move it around, you can't unequip this. So you have to be, because it does give -1 toughness, you have to be conscious of potentially opening yourself up to an end of festivities. That's another reason why Flame Breather is slightly better than Infiltrator. So this triggers the Flame Breather, where you have to sack it eventually to trigger the Infiltrator, but also it can be equipped up. Now, eventually the Infiltrator can be equipped up, but you have to grow it first. And then once it's grown, you're kind of really scared of it getting bolted or lightning struck. So then you're like, you have this equipment setting around and you're like, don't want to equip it because you have a 4 toughness Infiltrator and you don't want to put it in range of the thing. So, yeah. And then I was actually pretty pleased with this. I think this card is flexible enough that I think playing 1 of it in the sideboard, you may want more, but I think overall these burn spells are where the deck might falter. So I think just playing Summer Braids and stuff, what I'll probably be doing is cutting the Lightning Strikes and the Infiltrators against decks that those cards aren't good against, and playing the better removal spells. And then Rotten Reunion, I think, is a really solid. I'm really surprised by this card. It's very subtly very good. There's a lot of things that kind of randomly target one creature to return back from the graveyard, or 1 card to return back from the graveyard. And Rot Reunion is a very solid card. It triggers off the Flame Breather and to answer the opponent's shenanigans with using the graveyard. And then obviously if you attack with them, then they grow the Infiltrator. But that was really not. Actually, now that I'm only on 1 Infiltrator, I think I'm going to go down on 1 Swamp. Yeah, I like that. Again, because I want the untapped land to get the Blast Runner in play. This is the only card that you really want to get in early. The Menace makes it sort of last a little longer than most typical 1-drops, but you definitely are pretty sad to draw him pretty late in the game. But yeah, I think he's solid enough that you want it. And then, there's not too many other cards that you can play in a deck where you're kind of on demand. You need to play only 1 or 2 drops. So the fact that this is in standard, I think, is a reasonable play. Not just reasonable, I think it's a pretty good card. All right. I think we're about to start.